Hey, Matthew.
If they offer me a deal as well, just to get my master's.
All right,
Hey,
let's
Bert.
see what we've got here.
Bert.
It's hard to find. Yeah, they're good folks over there. That's fine.
All right. All right, so nutritional group number 6 is water. So we're going to look at the importance of our water intake, how do we work out how much water we should be drinking, because we should try and individualize that as much as possible. It's okay to give a global, everybody should drink X amount, but really we need to try to be a little more precise because it's very different for different individuals, and even for one individual it's going to change at different times of the year or if you train in different environments. Right? So there's a lot of learning objectives on this chapter. The chapter's not very long, but there's a lot going on. So water is the most crucial element, right? I can live for a couple of weeks without protein or fat, but you can't live for more than a couple of days if you don't have water. So it really is the #1 nutrient, right? Somewhere around 60% of your body weight is water, and when we are looking at dehydration, around about 2%, we start to see a drop in certain types of performance. So 2% drop in body weight because of fluid loss, and we start to see some memory and learning impairments, effects on aerobic performance, right? A little bit further down the line before we see effects on anaerobic performance, but it doesn't take very much. So the first thing is that concentration. So some days you might find that you're having a hard time concentrating and then realize that you haven't had a drink since breakfast maybe. So try to keep topping up during the day because it will help with schoolwork as well as with your physical activity. Let's see. Heart rate goes up, body temperature goes up if we start to get dehydrated, and a body weight loss of 9%, anywhere depending upon your size, 9 to 12% body weight loss, and you're looking at the possibility of dying at that point. That level of dehydration can kill you. So it's not very much. We don't have a lot of leeway here. And it's important to understand how we can monitor what's going on. You can have a look through the kinds of functions that water is involved in. And I just wanted to point out that eye fluid thing. So if you wake up in the morning and you've got your eyes feel scratchy, if that ever happens, that's a good indication that you're dehydrated. Right, so if you wake up some days and you just feel like you've got to keep blinking because they feel really itchy and scratchy, the actual cornea, then that can be indicative of dehydration. So at rest, our body is very good at maintaining fluid balance, right? And we take fluid in the form of obvious liquids, so anything that we're drinking, probably for most people is somewhere around 60% of their fluid injection, of their water ingestion is actual liquid form. But certain food groups have high levels of water. So shrimp, bananas, potatoes, lots of water. Crackers, very little water. So again, depending on what you're eating, you may get quite a lot of your water from your food choices. And also, remember at the end of our electron transport chain, all the way back at the beginning of the semester, we bring in oxygen and we pick up hydrogen and we form water, which we can then expel. So we also make somewhere around 10% water through aerobic metabolism. So we get some of our water intake from that. Right? How much you need is going to vary quite dramatically based upon the type and intensity of physical activity that you take part in, what the environmental temperature is like, so is it cool, is it hot? Humidity plays a big role, so how humid? Is it going to be someone who's larger is going to obviously need more water than someone who's smaller, so there's lots of factors that we have to take into account. And somewhere around 2.5 liters of water per day on average is what we lose through various avenues, and so we need to match that with our intake, right? And the recommendation is that we try to match our water intake to our energy expenditure. So technically, the terms that you'll see, euhydration, anything with EU at the front means typical, normal. So euhydration means that you're at an appropriate hydration state. Hypohydration means that we're seeing an overall loss of water, so we're not balancing our intake with what we're losing, and eventually that would lead to dehydration. So the table gives us an indication of where this is going on. We lose somewhere around 0.5 to 1.5 liters per day in urine. Anywhere from just under 0.5 to 1 liter of sweat with some exercise. We'll talk about extreme exercise in a minute. Some through the feces, some through insensible perspiration. So when you're breathing, right, we lose water from the membranes in our throat and our nose. So if you breathe out, we're very aware of the fact that there's some water in that breath, but we do, one of the reasons why wearing a mask can help some people, because it helps you to maintain some of the water you don't breathe in will evaporate. Coming in, 0.5 to 1.5 liters through liquid. This is at resting state, right? So at rest, you may have to drink anywhere up to 1.5 liters a day. As soon as you exercise, then we're adding on to that. Some through food, some through metabolic water. So what we're looking at is that our bottom line here needs to be balanced, right? They need to match in order for us to maintain normal hydration status. So one of the ways that water is beneficial to the body is the fact that our excitable tissues have to move impulses along, and water itself doesn't carry electricity very well, right? But once we add electrolytes to the water, now it's capable of carrying an electrical charge, which is great because I've got to get that signal from the brain down to the muscles in order for anything to happen. So for excitable tissues like skeletal muscle, heart muscle, nervous tissue, we've got to have electrolytes within the water in those tissues in order to move this signal around, right? So electrolytes are just mineral salts that dissolve in water and disassociate, and we have charged molecules, ions, right? And the job of the electrolytes is to maintain water where we need it in the tissues and not allow it to just be moving around the body across membranes where we don't want it to go. So we have electrical charges, and osmotic pressure is just the technical term for if I've got a membrane, right, how much electrolyte do I have on either side of the membrane? We want to have a balance of charges across the membrane to hold the water in the tissues. They have a nice little diagram. It's kind of like our high-low, right? So if I have equal amounts of electrolytes on either side of the membrane, water doesn't move. If I add more electrolytes to one side of the membrane and the membrane is permeable to water, then the water moves towards the side where most of the solute is, right? Because this side, once I add more electrolytes, means I've got less water. Okay? So the water moves in that direction if it can. Water balance is maintained primarily through the kidneys and the gastrointestinal tract. So we want to keep the water where we need it. We don't want it just moving willy-nilly across these membranes. Kidneys play a role in conserving sodium for us. So if I'm exercising and that my sodium content starts to drop because I'm sweating so much, that stimulates the adrenal glands to release aldosterone, and aldosterone stimulates the kidneys to reabsorb sodium. Right? So it acts as a control. So if I'm working out really, really hard and I'm sweating a ton and my sodium levels are dropping down, then my kidneys will reabsorb sodium from the water. The gastrointestinal tract absorbs minerals to match needs. So it depends which mineral is being recognized as dropping and might be a little bit low, and will reabsorb more of that particular mineral as needed. So it might be potassium, it might be sodium, it might be chloride, right? We'll reabsorb what we need in the small intestine. Got to keep this electrolyte balance within a very, very tight range, right? So if I want to exercise a lot, I need the nervous tissue and the muscle tissue to be working very well. That means I need the electrolyte balance. Plus, if I lose a lot in sweat, it can actually be fatal, right? But at the minimum, we're looking at some dysfunction in impulse transmission and therefore in muscle contraction, right? So that's not very useful if I'm trying to compete at a high level. We might need electrolyte supplements, so we mentioned the other day about the fact that they add electrolytes to sports drinks, right? Carbohydrate and electrolyte. You may just need to add a little bit more salt to your food. Generally, in our culture, we get so much salt in our food that we don't need to take additional sodium. If we look at the electrolyte content in sweat, sweat has less electrolytes in it than blood. So that means that the water doesn't move out as quickly as it might if it had more electrolytes in it. Right? So it's hypotonic if I'm exercising intensely. So back here we said somewhere around 1.5 to 2.5 liters a day at rest we lose in sweat. When we look at what's going on in intense exercise in the heat, then we can lose up to 3 to 4 liters per hour, some people. Right? That's a huge amount of water loss. If I train in the heat, then we see some interesting adaptations because we might start to sweat at a higher rate. So we sweat more, which initially seems like an odd reaction because if I'm sweating more, then I would lose more electrolytes. But actually what happens is in adapting to the heat, your electrolyte content in your sweat goes down. So in the summer, if you pay attention, in the summer, your sweat will taste less salty than it does in the winter. Right? Because here we get such fluctuations, it's almost like you have to reacclimatize to the heat every summer, right? Because it's not like it stays warm over the winter. So at the beginning of the hot season, we're basically reacclimatizing. And as that occurs, we start to reduce the electrolyte content in the sweat. Start to sweat earlier if we train in the heat. That's a good thing because sweating is a mechanism for keeping our body cool. So by starting to sweat earlier, that's an adaptation to try to help us maintain our body temperature more efficiently. Okay, so in the book, they have a little practice that I thought we could do on how do I work out what my sweat loss is, right? So this is going to be the only time you will hear me recommend that you use a scale, right? Because we want to just stay away from using a scale when we're talking about weight or fat loss or weight goals, right? Because there's a problem there, it doesn't tell us how fat we are. right? So we've said that a lot during the semester. Standing on a scale is not a very useful way of telling me what my body composition is, right? However, standing on a scale can be a very useful field tool, applied tool, for working out what your sweat rate is and how much water, therefore, you need to be taking on board, right? So, as a field test then, what you have to do is weigh yourself before you exercise, okay? So, no clothes, weigh, what do I weigh? Go train, right? While you're training, you need to monitor how much fluid you take on board. So I don't just drink willy-nilly. If I want to do this properly, I have to be scientific and know I took on half a litre while I was running for an hour and a half, or I took on 20 ounces or whatever, right? And then at the end of your training session, you dry off the sweat, get back on your scale, see what you weigh, right? And so to work this out then, your pre-exercise body weight plus your fluid intake minus your post-workout weight tells you how much fluid you lost. So the example in the book then, Sandy weighs 125 pounds. We need it in ounces, so has anybody got a calculator? 125 times 16. Straight?
Yes.
Okay. 2,000 ounces. All right. She goes out for a run for an hour, and she drank 12 ounces of water. And at the end of her run, she weighs in at 120 pounds, so 120 times 16.
1920. And 1,000. Sorry, 1,920. I'm sure you was crazy.
I was like, okay, that's okay. So, a sweat rate then, how much sweat did she lose?
92.
92? 92? Right? So what that tells us is that she didn't drink enough water for her hour run. Right? Because if she had drunk enough water, then she would not change weight. Right? So she lost more water here than she took on board. Does that make sense? Right. So, was her fluid intake enough to match her loss? Clearly not. Okay? And how much more water, or how much water now is she going to need to take on board to get back to her proper weight? So she's got to drink a lot of water now post-workout to rehydrate back to normal. Okay. Now, depending on the event that you're in, some people deliberately choose to dehydrate because as the length of the race goes on and the intensity is getting higher, they don't want to maintain weight. Like losing a few ounces could be the difference between winning and losing the race. If I can maintain my speed when the intensity is getting higher because I'm losing weight during the race, then they see that as a good trade-off. Right? but it's a pretty slippery slope. That's a very fine line to walk. It's not really a good plan. People can die with that plan. So it's easy to try to get a feel for how much you need to drink. Preferably, you should maintain your weight a little bit more accurately than that during your training session. But you definitely need to know how much you need to be taking in after the training session to fully rehydrate again. So that's an acceptable use of a scale. Right? If you're going to use the scale with your athletes, you need to make sure that your athletes are educated why you're using the scale. Right? Because especially if you're working with females, if you put them on the scale, the first thing they're going to think is, you're checking out how fat I am. Because that's where we go. Right? Right? So it's a really good tool, particularly when you're in extreme environments, which we are. Right? Or if you're working somewhere where it's very hot and humid, how much water do I need to take on board at the end? Because you probably can't sometimes take on enough while you're exercising. It can get a bit silly in those environments. Right? How do I actually manage? How do I really measure? It's not about guesswork, because guesswork will lose you the game. Right? If winning is important, which it shouldn't be, but if winning is important, then you would need to do it properly. You would need to know exactly what is happening. Right? You can't fudge the issue and go, oh, well, I drank a bottle of water. Well, was a bottle of water enough? You can't have it both ways. If it's important to win, then you need to do it properly. Right? It's not difficult to do that. This is an easy calculation to do. Right. The other area then that we're losing a lot of electrolytes is through urine. And the content in our urine is going to vary over time. So our kidneys are going to fluctuate this sodium. They might hold back sodium if we need to. During exercise, as intensity increases, then sodium excretion decreases. So the harder I'm working, the more I'm sweating, the more those kidneys are going to hold on to the sodium for us. So the harder the exercise, if I go up in intensity, then you can go as low as 10 to 20% of what you're excreting at rest. So vastly different change in sodium content depending upon how hard you're working at any one time. So the body's pretty efficient. It's got some very clever mechanisms in place to try to keep this electrolyte balance as accurate as it can and to keep your water balance as accurate as it can. Right? But remember, the electrolyte balance is crucial because if that goes out of whack, now we've got dysfunction in impulse transmission, which means dysfunction in muscle contraction. It could impact heart function. The decrease in sodium, so some of that is because less sodium is excreted, the kidneys hold on to it. Some of it is that what we see when we look at actual urine production is that changes depending upon how hard we're working. So when you're sitting still and you go out and just do some low intensity work, so you walk home perhaps, then urine output increases. So you might get a hard and go, gotta go for a pee, right? But as you start to work harder and harder and harder, urine output decreases. So your body, bless you, your body switches to try to maintain water as you work harder. Okay? So the harder you work, the less urge you're going to have to go for a pee until you stop exercising. Because the body just is doing everything it can to maintain water and electrolyte balance as best it can. All right, we'll do this little bit. Okay. How often during the day do you feel thirsty? Me all the time. I never drink enough. So, feeling thirsty is your brain's way of telling you you need to intake some water. Okay? It's like feeling hungry. Is your brain's way of telling you that you need some calories to balance the work you're doing. So, the problem with thirst mechanism in humans is that it's not very effective. If you look at thirst mechanisms in other animals, it's really, really a lot more efficient than it is in humans. It's one of the things we don't do very well. So the thirst mechanism is your brain waking you up. It becomes a conscious thing that you need to have a drink. Okay? And it's controlled by areas of the brain that are linked with the hypothalamus. And so there's receptors in the carotid arteries and in other areas of the body that let the hypothalamus know that your plasma concentration is changing and electrolyte balance is out of whack, right? But mainly we're looking at plasma concentration. So your blood starts to get a little bit thicker and these signals get sent to the hypothalamus and the hypothalamus switches on and goes, oi, have a drink now, right? So the problem with that then is that in order to feel thirsty, I already have to be dehydrated enough for the hypothalamus to get the signal. So the thirst mechanism is a little behind the ball in humans because the goal, if 2% dehydration impacts performance, then I don't want to be dehydrated enough to feel thirsty. That means I'm already seeing lower performance, whether it's in the classroom, memory function, learning, or whether it's actual in my game and my physical performance. So thirst is a bit of a problem because I don't want to be thirsty. Thirsty means I'm in trouble. Okay. So I have a drink. If I drink enough water, my plasma concentration evens out, thirst mechanism turns off. Until the next time. Remember, if I'm dehydrated, we see increases in heart rate. That starts to stress the cardiovascular system. Okay. So being thirsty for any length of time, you probably would see resting heart rate go up. Takes humans up to 48 hours if they're being resistant to drinking. So if I'm only drinking when I want to, then if you get dehydrated quite badly, it can take 2 days to fully hydrate again. So I have to make myself drink which can be problematical for some individuals, don't like that feeling of water. You know, there are some days where you just drink and drink and drink, you're like, I am gonna float away if I drink anymore, and I still feel, bless you, I still feel thirsty, right? And I just cannot take in anymore, my stomach feels uncomfortable. How many of you have dogs? Right? When you take your dog to the park and you run your dog for 5-10 minutes and then you pour some water in the bowl, how long does it take your dog to drink the water in the bowl? I don't know about you, but our dog just puts her face in and doesn't come up again. Like it's like, I don't think she even breathes until the water in the bowl has gone. Right? Like dogs are very, very good at rehydrating. Very good at rehydrating. Humans, not so much. So, this information then tells us that regardless of whether I'm an athlete, I should drink little and often, even if I don't want to. Right? So it becomes almost like our nutrition scenario and our training scenario. I've got to apply some discipline now to drinking because I can't wait until I think I want to have a drink. I have to drink anyway. Well, you do that with your training, right? There are days, I know there are days, when you wake up and you're like, I don't want to go to the gym. I just don't want to go, but I have to go, so I'm going to go, right? You make yourself go and train. We have to make ourselves drink. We have to make ourselves pick healthy food choices. But this idea of drinking a little bit on a regular basis, regardless of whether you think you need, this is a do as I say, not as I do, because I'm horrible at this. I have stickies all over my house and all over my office. Remember to drink. I'm terrible at drinking on a regular basis. All right, we're going to stop there, pick it up on Friday. Okay. Pay attention.